the cleaner who solved the bank's biggest problem. Valeria walked slowly down the street, staring at the pavement in front of her. Everything felt unreal. Just a few hours earlier, she had believed her future was finally beginning. Now, it felt like everything had collapsed. All her plans, all her dreams, gone. And suddenly she remembered the words of the woman who had raised her at the orphanage. Zina Grigorievna had warned her. "Lera, you can try," she had said kindly. "But life isn't always fair. Universities like that often choose students whose parents are rich, even if those students can barely add two numbers together." Back then, Lera refused to believe it. How could that be possible? She had always been the best student in mathematics. Even in 6th grade, her teacher had once said, "Honestly, Lera, you don't even need to attend my classes anymore." But she kept going anyway. Math was her world. While other children watched movies or played games, Lera studied textbooks that were meant for university students. Numbers made sense. Numbers were fair. Numbers didn't lie. But people did. Today, the results of the university entrance exams had been posted. She had walked up to the board with confidence. Her exams had been perfect. She knew it. But her name was not on the list. Instead, she saw another name. A girl who had taken the same exam. Lera clearly remembered that girl. She had spent the entire exam sitting quietly and doing nothing. But right before handing in her paper, the girl had slipped something between the pages. A bank card. And underneath it, she had written a number. Lera had instantly calculated the amount. Her head had spun. It was more money than Lera had ever seen in her life. Of course, she had been accepted. Lera suddenly felt her throat tighten. She had stood in front of the list, staring at the names. Someone behind her laughed. "Look at her," a voice said. "That little nobody is still trying to find her name." Lera didn't turn around. She already knew they were talking about her. Instead, she ran. She ran until the university building disappeared behind the trees. For hours, she wandered through the city. She didn't even notice where she was going. But reality slowly returned. She had to find a job. The small amount of money she had saved would barely last a week. Luckily, the city had given her a small room in an old shared apartment. They had promised her a proper apartment someday, since she was an orphan. But she had heard stories. Sometimes that temporary room became permanent. Still, she tried not to lose hope. Her neighbors were kind, and the elderly woman next door often shared food with her. Lera finally sat down on a bench in front of a large building. Only then did she notice where she was. It was a bank. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since morning. Just then, the bank door burst open. A woman stormed outside, waving her arms angrily. "I don't need this job anyway," she shouted. "I'll find something better." The woman staggered toward the bench and sat down heavily beside Lera. Now Lera noticed the smell of alcohol. Apparently, the woman had been drinking. "They think they're so important," the woman muttered. "Customers must be serious people." She continued complaining for several minutes. Eventually, Lera understood what had happened. The woman had just been fired. She had worked as a cleaner at the bank. 3 months of work. Gone. Because she had shown up drunk. After a few more complaints, the woman stood up and wandered away. Lyra remained on the bench, and suddenly a crazy idea appeared in her mind. She slowly stood up. Then she walked toward the bank entrance. Inside, a security guard stopped her. "Yes?" "I heard you might need a cleaner," Lyra said nervously. Within minutes, she was sitting in a small office across from a manager. "How did you hear about the vacancy?" the woman asked. "We only opened it 15 minutes ago." Lyra explained about the woman outside. The manager sighed. "Yes, that was our cleaner. We warned her twice." Then she looked at Lyra carefully. "Can you clean offices?" Lyra nodded immediately. "I can do anything." "All right," the woman said. "You're hired, but you'll be on probation." Lyra almost started clapping from happiness. Instead, she simply nodded. "Thank you." They showed her where the cleaning supplies were kept. Her tasks were simple. Mop the floors, water the plants, empty the trash, and keep the offices tidy. But when she started cleaning, she realized something. The previous cleaner had been terrible. Dust everywhere, dirty corners, trash hidden behind cabinets. Lyra worked carefully. She always did. 2 weeks passed quickly. During that time, she learned a lot about the bank. The owner was a young man named Michael Sergeyev. At the moment, he was away on business. The bank was run by his assistant. The employees liked Michael. They said he was still learning but worked very hard. Lyra imagined what he might be like, but she never expected to meet him so soon. One morning, the entire bank suddenly became chaotic. Employees rushed through the hallways. Everyone looked busy. Too busy. "Why is everyone acting like this?" Lyra asked one of the receptionists. "The boss is back," the woman whispered. Michael Sergeyev had arrived. Lyra finally saw him a few minutes later. He was younger than she expected. Tall, confident, and surprisingly handsome. For a moment, Lyra imagined him as the prince from her childhood dreams. But she quickly shook the thought away. He was the owner of the bank. She was just the cleaner. So she grabbed her mop and continued working. 2 months passed before Lyra saw the owner of the bank again. During that time, she quietly cleaned the offices every evening. She tried not to draw attention to herself, but she couldn't help noticing how different life inside the bank was compared to her own. People here earned good salaries. They wore expensive suits. They talked about investments, contracts, and numbers that sounded unreal to Lyra. But what surprised her the most was how careless some of them were with those numbers. One afternoon, Natasha, one of the receptionists, walked into the small storage room where Lyra usually ate lunch. "Lyra, are you coming to the cafeteria?" she asked. Lyra smiled and shook her head. "I brought pancakes today, cottage cheese filling." Natasha sighed dramatically. "I can't say no to your cooking." They sat down at the small table in the corner. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then Natasha suddenly looked worried. "Have you thought about where you'll work next?" Lyra stopped chewing. "What do you mean?" Natasha leaned closer. "You didn't hear?" "Hear what?" "The bank might close." Lyra froze. "That's impossible." Natasha shrugged. "That's what everyone is whispering." She lowered her voice. Apparently, Michael Sergeyev invested a huge amount of money somewhere, and it failed. Lyra frowned. But the bank looked stable. It was, Natasha said, but now they say only a miracle can save it. A miracle? Yes, the bank needs to survive 3 months. After that, insurance payments will return part of the money. And if it doesn't? Natasha sighed. Then we're all unemployed. Lyra felt a knot forming in her stomach. This job had saved her. Without it, she would barely survive. And somehow, the thought of Michael losing everything bothered her even more. That evening, she worked slowly. Her thoughts kept returning to the same question. Was there really no solution? Finally, the office became quiet. Most employees had already gone home. Only one office still had the light on. Michael Sergeyev's office. Lyra always cleaned that room last. He usually worked later than everyone else. When she quietly opened the door, she saw something unexpected. Michael had fallen asleep at his desk. His head rested on his arms. Documents were scattered everywhere. One folder lay open beside him. Lyra stepped closer. She glanced at the papers, then froze. The documents contained the financial rescue plan for the bank. She quickly scanned the numbers, and something immediately felt wrong. Interesting. She leaned closer to the papers. The calculations were messy, complicated, but the solution was actually simple. Very simple. Lyra grabbed a pencil. She began calculating quickly in her head, then writing. Numbers connected like pieces of a puzzle. She became so focused that she didn't notice Michael waking up, until his voice suddenly broke the silence. "What exactly are you doing?" Lyra jumped. She turned around slowly. Michael was watching her with tired but curious eyes. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to." He gestured toward the papers. "Well, what did you find?" Lyra hesitated. She wasn't sure if he was serious or mocking her. But his expression remained calm. So she took a deep breath. "The plan is too complicated," she said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Explain?" Lyra began pointing at the numbers. "You're trying to solve 5 problems at once, but they all come from the same source." Michael leaned forward. "Go on." She continued. "These loans and these contracts, they cancel each other out if you restructure them this way." She drew several lines on the paper. Michael stared at the page. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then he suddenly grabbed another calculator. He started checking her numbers. 5 minutes later, his eyes widened. 10 minutes later, he looked at her in disbelief. "Where did you learn this?" Lyra shrugged nervously. "I like math." Michael laughed softly. "You just solved a problem that my entire financial department couldn't fix for a week." Lyra suddenly realized how late it was. "Oh no, I still have to finish cleaning." But Michael barely heard her. He was already buried in the calculations again. The next morning, Lyra walked into the building as usual, but something felt strange. Employees were whispering, looking at her. Then the bank manager appeared. "Lyra," she said quickly. "The boss wants to see you." Lyra froze. What happened? You'll find out. Inside Michael's office, several executives were already waiting. They all turned when Lyra entered. Michael stood beside the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling. "Yesterday, this young woman solved the problem we've been fighting for a week." One of the men scoffed. "The cleaner?" Michael's smile disappeared. "Yes. And unless someone here has a better solution, I suggest we listen to her." The room fell silent. Lyra slowly sat down. Her hands trembled slightly. But once she started explaining the numbers, everything became clear again. Numbers always made sense. The next 2 months were the hardest time in the bank's history. Lyra practically lived in Michael's office. Together they checked contracts, recalculated investments, renegotiated deals. Slowly, the situation improved. And during those long nights, something else began to grow between them. Respect, trust, and something deeper. Finally, the day came when the insurance payment arrived. Michael burst into the office laughing. "We did it!" He grabbed Lyra and spun her around. "The bank is safe!" Lyra smiled. But inside she felt something else. This meant their work together was over. Michael noticed the sadness in her eyes. "Come with me tonight," he said. "Dinner?" Lyra shook her head. "No restaurants." "Then what?" She smiled. "Let's go to the river." That night, they sat beside a small fire near the water. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt truly happy. 2 days later, she returned to work, but the manager stopped her at the entrance. "Lyra, you need to go to the office." Michael was waiting. When she entered, he handed her an envelope. "You're fired." Lyra stared at him in shock. "What?" He smiled. "You can't clean floors anymore." Then he handed her another document. "Because you're officially enrolled in the financial university." Lyra blinked. "What?" "The rector is a client of the bank," Michael said. "And you passed every entrance exam." Her eyes filled with tears. "So now," he added gently, "you can study the way you always wanted." 3 months later, during the bank's New Year celebration, Michael raised a glass. "I'd like to introduce my fiancée." Everyone turned. A beautiful woman in a silver dress walked beside him. For a moment, no one recognized her. Then the manager gasped. "Lyra!" Michael laughed. "Yes. My future wife." The entire room erupted in cheers, and Lyra looked into his eyes with a smile she had waited her whole life to give. If this touched you, like the video and subscribe to the channel for new stories.